Welcome to another week of Anderson Medicine, and this is a really good one because you can't help but notice there's a big construction project going on at Mercy Health Anderson Hospital. It's about a $71 million project. It's going on for the next 22 months, and the guys running it are here today. Larry Bagby, System Director of Facility and Construction Planning, and Neil Fetters, who's the Anderson Hospital Director of Operations. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So you guys had to take like a minute to leave like your construction hats off and come out here. And people don't realize when you are building on a hospital, the hospital's still running. In fact, it's running at capacity because it needs to expand. And there's unique things. And Larry, your background is kind of, you've done this before, West Hospital, Springfield. So what kind of places have you built before?
Well, I've been in healthcare my entire career and having a lot of different roles and different positions. Sometimes it was renovation of spaces, renovating of a kitchen or an operating room. And then as I progressed through my career, some of them got to be larger buildings or larger projects. One of the first big ones was a replacement children's hospital in Houston, Texas, back in the late 80s, early 90s. Where we took a children's hospital apart from the adult one and built a replacement facility, and that was about 260,000 square feet. So a pretty big project that I was involved in back then.
So what's unique about doing construction next to or inside a working hospital?
Well, one of the things you want to try to do is accomplish both goals. You want to continue to deliver expert medical care while you plan for the future. And how do you do it such that you don't interfere with each other? There's always vibration, noise, parking, access, staff, smoking. There's all types of issues that you want to concomitantly have things both going on or not going on, but not interfere with each other. And when people are in the operating room, when patients are coming to visit their loved one, we don't want to interfere with what's going on, but we have schedules to meet. We try to keep the project moving ahead, but not interfere with what's going on in the cath lab.
So you have two projects going on right now. There's a Anderson Tower and there's a Jewish Hospital Tower. And the Anderson Tower is going to be 5 stories, and the Jewish Tower is 6 stories. And why is the Jewish Tower higher than our tower?
The Jewish Tower had some different needs that had to be met when the plan was built and put together. And the biggest issue is that they're getting a new emergency room at the first floor. If you've been in the Jewish emergency room,
yeah.
It's a fairly congested space, and we wanted to be able to bring them into 21st century medicine. And so the building was brought up to put the ED underneath it. The second big piece is that on the second floor, the pre- and post-operative preparatory area with the lobby to be able to get into the rest of the campus. They are an older campus, kind of a patchwork quilt of buildings that were put together over time. And so there's a lot of little retrofits to get that ED on the first floor accessible to the public and the ambulances, but also to get that second floor access with the lobby and access to the pre and post spaces of the operating room and recovery room, and make it easy for families to get into the building, get their medical care, and get out, whether it's same-day surgery or long-term care surgery. They might spend a few days in the hospital.
Cool. That was a great answer. You sent like 4 hours of questions over, and so we're going to have a pretty active 20 minutes. But that wasn't one of them. Why does Jewish have an extra hour? So, kind of just, as you think about your background, I just think this is fascinating. You've been almost like 20 years administrator of internal medicine at Baylor College of Medicine, administrator of family medicine, UT, University of Texas, vice president of professional services at Texas Children's Hospital, administrative manager, Department of Surgery, and your clinical background is as a nutritionist. How does that all feed into doing construction in a hospital?
I got into healthcare just because of a strong interest early in my career. And it was a mixture of medicine and nutrition, and then with some food service background that mom and dad gave me, and started to work in the facilities and taught patients how to eat, but worked with the medical team and worked with doctors and nurses and the plant department to solve problems, whether they be problems in the kitchen and problems on the floor. And over time, you learn how healthcare works, you learn how the team communicate, you learn what's important, so that when someone's talking about elbow room in the operating room so that they can do a surgical procedure, you can start to think about the need for construction space or equipment that you might choose to have clearance so things move around the operating room appropriately. When you're talking to nurses or pharmacists and they talk about the patient, what's good for the patient, you then start to think of how do I design this space so that it's good for the patient and good for the family, or good for the nursing staff to deliver the care to the patient. And so having grown up a little bit in medicine and listened to grand rounds and listened to nursing conferences and been at Morning Report, you hear about how people deliver care to families and trade off and pass the baton, and then you start to think about the value of important pieces of equipment or door swings that would be better if they're 4-feet doors instead of 3-feet doors, or commodes in the bathroom that might need to be compliant with ADA or even a little bit further from the wall to help meet the needs of the patient. So that clinical background of listening and watching and talking and teaching with them, and then trying to say, now how are we going to design it, but then more importantly, how are we going to build it? How are we going to make sure that we build it so that it stays in place for a long time? Or how do we build it with ceiling clearances so that when medicine moves and we're doing our next clinical program, we have space and clearance between the floor and the ceiling to put in the next big piece of equipment, or we have a footprint between columns so that we have enough space to renovate those things. A lot of the projects I've done early in my life are renovations, and you have limits of, I have this big 36-inch column and I can't move it, so I've got to fit the program between. When you're designing it and building it now, if we can put a little bit more room between, we're buying long-term flexibility for the next clinical program that evolves in the 21st century.
So, and you've talked, I know we've talked a lot about how the clinical team informs the construction and vice versa. So let's talk to the guy in the middle here. So Neil Fetters, who's the director of operations. So he have to operate this hospital while these guys are all doing constructions. And Neil also has a clinical background in occupational therapy, and also has his master's from Northern Kentucky University in executive leadership and organizational change. And he has operational oversight for all those things that kind of make the hospital go, like lab and medical records and central supply and a bazillion other things, and hospital oversight for hospital expansion. So Neil, how do you keep this thing going while the construction team's doing it? And how do you guys work together on operating the hospital but also construction?
So that's the balance. That's the opportunity that we have to tap into Larry's experience with past building projects that he's utilized to say, all right, Larry, what have you done in your past? How has this project impacted operations? And then take that opportunity to kind of morph that into whether it be executive meetings or planning meetings or whatever it is that we want to do as we're melding that construction piece into operations. Because at the end of the day, we still have to take care of patients. We have to take care of patients, we have to take care of our customers, and we have to make sure that we're meeting their needs all around what's happening around us, whether it be concrete coming out of the ground, steel coming out of the ground, and what are we going to do when we shut down a parking lot, and what does it mean when we have a new front door? And so you have to be able to plan for that, but then tap into somebody like Larry to say, okay, tell me what you've learned, and then how can we operationalize it here? It's a very delicate balance.
So this is just like there's a number of phases here, and started out with some parking lot work, some internal work, some stuff people probably didn't see over the past almost 2 years. What were the phases? Where are we now?
So some of the phases that we've had, we had the opportunity first to expand our parking lot, but in order to expand the parking lot, we actually had to shut down part of the parking lot in order to prepare for this. And so that was the first part of the outside of the construction aspect. So we had to block off the footprint that it would be our tower, and then we actually had the inside work where we infilled our atrium space. We had a big open space in the atrium. We filled in 2 additional layers, and so now they are fully functional living spaces, operational spaces, family places where you can come grab a cup of coffee. We've improved our waiting rooms. We've done about a lot of that. That was the inside of the work. The outside of the work is, now that we have our footprint in place, now you have to see we had to move our front door over probably about 150 feet, and now we have a new front door, new front entrance, and so now you're starting to see some of that steel and that concrete coming out of the ground.
So pretty much about every hour of the day, there's an email from you, like a construction update.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
kind of, so and some of that seems anticipated, and some of it is kind of reacting to, stuff that happens. And most recently, the big thing was putting some piers down next to the water line.
Yes.
And that was kind of, there was a lot of planning going into
Yes.
that, just as an example.
Yeah, and when you're doing something like that, you know, when you're operating delicately around the water line, you have to prepare for that. So you have to have an external water truck on site. You have to have for lack of a better phrase, a plumber on site in case anything were to happen. And then you have to have the people around it that know the possible impact. So we had to prepare for the worst. And while we're doing that and being well prepared in case anything does happen. And so you're exactly right. That delicate balance of kind of dancing around the water line, but also planning of a brand new tower, you have to make sure you're planning appropriately.
So Larry, there's a lot of people on the team have different titles and things, like the roles of the architect, engineers, general contractor. Who are those folks and kind of where do they fit in?
So after Jeff and his medical staff had the dream of building a tower and expanding the capacity of the building, you have to have people that can put that dream into reality. An architect is going to be a person who can plan the space and design spaces to meet various clinical functions. But you also have to kind of look back at your history and say, well, where is that water line? And so you'll get a civil engineer who's going to look at the water line, the electrical feeds. He's going to look at the sewer and the rain drains and say, where might we put this to take advantage of things that exist? And that would be the civil engineer. And he would be the expert that would be helping us talk to the Cincinnati Water Works department to say, where do we get our water? Where does our sewer go? You've got to get a structural engineer who's going to say, well, how big is the building going to be and what's the structure to hold it up? Shall we use steel or shall we use concrete to hold it up? How tall will it be? How hard will the concrete be, or how big will the column be that holds that building up? That guy's a structural person who's looking at the underground softness of the earth and where's bedrock, or how tall are we going to go up, and how shall I recommend that we build the building? You're going to get another engineer who's going to look at all of the air handling system and all the electrical systems and the water systems. What are the demands of these beds in the ICU, and how big should the pipe be to feed it all the water that it needs to meet the needs of the patients? That engineer is trained and certified in the state of Ohio, and in many cases you want to have those drawings that they design stamped with their engineering stamp, so that when you're bringing it forward for approval, someone is going to say, it's not Joe Schmo who designed it, but it's an engineer who's been certified in the state of Ohio. You'll also want to get some folks whose expertise is on the inside and the finishes and the fit out. And so Mercy has a design team of talented people that have done this before that are thinking at, how did I structurally build the building and how do I get electrical feeds in there, but how am I going to finish out the design of the waiting room? What might the furniture look like? How might I decorate it so that it is appealing, gets enough light in, gets access to Mother Nature and color? So those are the interior design people that are working with our architects. And so that's another group of expertise and talented people that are helping finish the building. We're also going to have a lot of technology in the building. We're going to have electrical cables. We're going to have fiber optic feeds that bring the data and the power and the phone lines up to the top. And so you're going to get an engineer with background in technology who's going to design the data cables and the phone cables and the security cameras and the badges that are going to unlock and lock spaces, whether it be the laundry in the linen room or the controlled room for pharmaceutical supplies. You have different levels of security at different spaces, and you want people who have some expertise and can listen to the medical staff and the nurses and the executive leaders and say, how do we design it? How do we create security? How do we create the mechanical systems and all the systems that make the building operate the way you want it?
How far down is the bedrock?
Well, the bedrock is about 50 feet down in general in average. And so we're going to drill these piers down to them. And you usually want the concrete socket, the last couple of feet into the rock, to be usually about 3 feet into the bedrock. And so we make a plan by doing sample drillings, and then we hire someone who's going to drill different piers of 24 inches, 36 inches, reinforced with rebar, and then they're going to drill down to that, they're going to measure, and they're going to drill down into that bedrock, and then they're going to measure it again before they put the rebar in and put the concrete in, so that they can hold up that 5-story building.
So you guys had this truck, like a big ultrasound truck or something, like driving around for weeks, checking the ground. We were all curious about that. Is that what they're doing?
Right. They're trying to find that rock, and they're trying to measure the hardness of that rock. Some rock is soft and won't hold a lot of weight. Some of it is bedrock and is pretty firm, probably some of the stone left behind by the glaciers. And you want to get into that bedrock so that you can put a building in that weighs a lot and isn't going to move.
So if you're just joining us, it's Anderson Medicine, another week of talking about medicine. This time we're talking about building. We're talking about the $71 million hospital expansion at Mercy Health Anderson Hospital. We're here with Larry Bagby, the Director of Construction Planning, and Neil Fetters, the Director of Operations. And so, Neil, every week there's this OAC, owner, architect, contractor, like HGTV on steroids.
Yep.
I mean, it's pretty intense. What do you guys do at that meeting?
So we meet at least weekly, and we talk about the construction project as a whole, but we bring in the construction planner, we bring in the electrician, we bring in the infection control, we bring in, at any point in time when we have something that's impacting an end user, we bring that person in and we say, okay, here's what we're planning to do. How is that going to impact you? How is that going to impact the hospital? And you lay out weekly what are the projects. They're broken down into several aspects: the inside work, the outside work, the electrical work, and you say these are going to be the impacts. And then they send out an email and it says, all right, end users, you're going to either feel some vibration, you could smell something such as welding going on, you could see whether it be smoke going on or something, whatever they're doing, so that no one is alarmed when they have a project like this. So those are the types of things that we talk about. And then furthermore, we say, next several weeks, here's what we're planning on doing. Let's talk about any issues that may impact it.
You guys put out this this kind of weekly thing, and one of the key things there is noise. How many decibels? And when they were doing what seemed to me the loudest thing was drilling, it was like 62 decibels or something, which was actually quieter than the piano in the atrium there. And so it's pretty impressive how they can, take apart stuff with less noise. Is that something unique to hospital construction, Larry, or is it just how things work?
There's a lot of technical specifications that go into a construction project. And depending on where you're building the building, you might have different specifications about where that bedrock is, or are you in an urban center, or are you out in the open in a green space? When we did the West Hospital project, we had some green space and we were a bit further away from the school or from the restaurant, and we were a little bit less sensitive to some of the noise because people were 100 or 200 yards away. In this particular project, we might be 20 feet away from the cath lab, and that sound is really critically important. So being able to predict what the sound level might be and to be able to work with Neil and his team or with the cath lab manager to say, here's the work we have to do. This is about how long it will take. Should we work second shift and maybe start at 4 or 5 in the afternoon? There's certain things you don't want to do on a Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock when the cath lab is in full blown or the operating room is busy, and you know that you're likely to be disruptive. If you're downtown and you're putting in steel rivets, you might be making a different type of noise, and it might disrupt office workers differently than it's going to disrupt a physician who's listening through a stethoscope for heart sounds. And so you want to be sensitive to where am I and what are the needs. But frequently when you run into problems and you have difficulty, the common language that I always ask is, what does specifications say? We've got a problem, we're in a meeting with 12 people, we're trying to solve a problem, and at some point you have opinions, but at some point you want to say, what do the specs say? What do the specs say on duration, on noise level, on hardness of the steel, on quality of the steel weld? Because the specs will say, we looked ahead and we predicted what's going to happen, and we are requiring the subcontractor to perform at a certain level. And when we hired him, we said, you will perform at a certain level, and that might mean off-shift work. That might mean working on Saturdays. That might mean predicting that we're going to have some rain, and we might be working in the mud pit for a while, and so we're going to have some down days. The weather wasn't necessarily our friend, but the specs will dictate what will winter look like in Cincinnati and what will be the down days. So the specifications can be really, really critically important, particularly when you're trying to think of cleanliness or particle filtration that's going to come out of a certain room. When you're building a clean room for a pharmacy as opposed to building a linen room, there's different specs in terms of the filtration and what we're going to deliver. to the space.
And Larry's right. When the community would look at Anderson Hospital, you would see the overhang, you would see the canopy, and that's where you would drive up and you would see it. Well, not only is noise, but vibration that Larry talked about, we were removing the canopy from that, and that is directly attached to the cath lab. And so they were doing procedures inside of there while we were removing that. And so that delicate balance of, if you're feeling vibrations, we need to stop and we need to communicate with what's going on inside the cath lab and then what's happening on the field. So you have to have that communication, and it's got to be clearly laid out as to what to expect.
Yeah, you guys have monitors in the various places. So hospitals, as you can imagine, are regulated, have a lot of regulations. Joint Commission, Department of Health. When you're doing construction on a hospital, it's even more regulated. And so what are just some of the, zoning and fire marshal and the water district, and you listed like 20 here, some of the regulations that you have to, go through just to even get to the ability to do construction?
So the acronym is AHJ, the authority having jurisdiction. So when you're trying to think about safety of the job site, when you're trying to think about water flows, when you're trying to think about zoning in the neighborhood, in the community, when you're thinking about after we finish building it and move in, the Ohio Department of Health, the Joint Commission of Accreditation, there's a lot of different people that are here to help us finish our job and make sure that we do it right, so that it's safe for people to go in, so that it's clean and the water is not going to cause trouble, and it's going to fit in with the community. And so from the very beginning, when the idea and the dream gets thought of, you start with zoning. What are you allowed to do in this site? You start with safety. What can we build? What will the site hold? And then you take your idea forward and you say to someone, well, what do you think about this? And that might be the fire marshal who wants to make sure that there's enough exit signs so that people can get out of the existing building and maybe out of the new tower and have room to escape if there was an unfortunate event. You want to make sure that you can bring in enough of the electrical feed so you can feed all your medical equipment, but you also want to be able to get off the site all of the sewage that gets created by the people, but also all the rainwater. You used to have a piece of earth that absorbed some of that rain, and now we're putting a big building up that does not allow for any of that rain. The water's got to go somewhere, and someone's watching to say, is it going to go into the stream? And that would be a water expert. In Anderson Township, we have the luxury of being close by to the township offices here to be able to get advice. And then we sometimes have to go to the county or to the fire marshal to get various opinions about what we're going to build or what life is like while we're building it. Is it continue to be safe for the workers who are on the site? No one's going to fall. Or if while we're building it, we have fire prevention systems in place, so that if during the construction something unfortunate were to occur, we can attend to a fire, we can put something out, we have adequate water feeds to attend to those things, and feed the fire marshal's fire truck so he can assist with it.
So us folks that look out the window and watch the construction guys and have all sorts of thoughts and good input, there's a couple of things that, one is there is a very long passageway to get into the alternative entrance. And it's like this big blue wing thing where you pull up. You guys actually designed that. And so not only do you get the blame, but you actually get the credit for creating how we get into the hospital. Why is it so long, and what does it do?
So the passageway, from what I understand, is the longest of its sort in the state of Ohio. And within that, in order to create the hospital where it needs to be, we had to create this new passageway. And so the passageway entails a lot of discussion and a lot of opportunities, such as, do we heat it? How often do we heat it? Do we insulate it? Do we make sure we paint it? And how steep is the ramp? And we provide, at the hospital, we provide ambassadors with wheelchairs that can bring in people from the community that have a difficult time walking, because what you've done is you take an entrance in which it took maybe 10 steps to enter, and now it's 200 steps to enter. And so we have to be mindful of that. And those are all of the things that we have to think about, just as a simple passageway into our facility.
Why does it have to be steel boxes? Does the crane fall down on it for safety, even what?
That's part of it. And one of the good things about the value of the team and the design team is we have the expertise of Champlin Architects, we have the expertise of Danis Construction, we have the expertise of Corda Engineers. All of them have built many buildings around the region and around the state. And all of them can think through about some of the issues of what does the ADA requirement in terms of the elevation and the pitch of a ramp, making it easy for people to get in and out. When we put these cranes up, might those cranes accidentally get blown down in the wind, and who regulates that, and what do we want to do to make sure that that steel structure is going to support any unfortunate event that might occur? While we're building this building, we're going to interfere with helicopter flight paths a little bit, someone bringing a patient in or taking a patient out, and we have to have a system of getting people in and out and a methodology of communicating so that we can very quickly respond to those changes. And if we have a crane on the site and the helicopter's coming in, how do we communicate quickly? How do we move it out of the way and make sure that that main entrance is still there? The main entrance from where it used to be to where it is today, there's a 4-foot elevation change. And so we had to be able to spread out that 4 feet over a longer path. And so that explains some of the distance. We had to put that main entrance in a location where people can get in and get out under a canopy. And so we took advantage of the mast building and put that canopy near the mast and near a place where we can spread that 4 feet over a long distance, give some cover for rain and snow, and pull it away from the construction zone and away from those cranes. So it's a wide variety of issues to create a safe place to get people in and out. When we designed it, we probably had a few misses, and so since we've installed it, we added some heat and some cooling for the summer. We put in some of the visual connections. It used to be that I could sit in the old hospital lobby and see my husband drive the car up. Well, now we can't, so we put in some cameras and a monitor, so I can still sit in the hospital and watch the monitor to see when the car comes up and the valet helps my husband get ready to receive me. We are decorating it a little bit more, improving the finish, insulating the walls, trying to keep the water and the moisture out of that walkway so that it's still, we can't shorten it, but we can make it a more comfortable experience for patients and visitors to get in and out of the building.
So when will this be done? When's the project completed?
So we should be moving into that project sometime in the summer of 2016. There's a number of markers on the calendar that come along that are events, and we should talk about those if time allows to talk about things. But we should be moving into that building and bringing patients in the summer of 2016.
Awesome. Hey, Larry and Neil, thank you. As the project continues, we'll come back. We'll continue to talk about it. Today it's a big old hole in the ground with some stairs coming up out of it. You know, very soon it's going to start to look like a real project. And so as we continue on, hopefully you guys will be able to come back. In the news this week, the resident match. You may not know that when you graduate from medical school, you may have an MD, but you can't practice medicine until you have completed graduate medical education or residency. On Friday, 41,000 people, seniors in medical school, found out where they're going to go to residency. We'll continue to talk about this next week as we have our guests, Dr. Caitlin Royer and Dr. Chris Riffle, both senior residents in the Jewish Hospital residency program. Dr. Riffle's going into primary care. Dr. Royer's going into hospital medicine. Both come from the same residency program. Why? How did they choose one of those two pathways given the same graduate medical education? Thank you, gentlemen, for another week of Anderson Medicine.